brothers or his extended family in some way, he still sees them as, not saved.
Mm-hmm.
So when he's going out there at the same time being like, hey, the Americans are going to be nice to you, he's also kind of being like, you should really think about Jesus a little bit, So
now, this is probably a really dumb question, but were there Native American tribes that just were Christians, or is this something that the white man brought in and they just kind of adopted?
That's a dumb question.
Yeah, that's what I thought. If I'm wondering it, somebody else out there probably is out there.
I'm sorry to be so blunt.
I would assume that they just adopted it from the white man.
They adopted it from the white man.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's no way they would have heard about it.
Okay. Yeah. That's kind of what I figured, but I just wanted to make sure. So
Yes. This is, I'm not gonna go into thing about that, but any group that came over, the English, the French, the Spanish, they were all some variation of Christian. So, they were, and some of them were really militant about it, being like, you got to take Jesus. And others were more just like, hey, if you want it, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But it did spread. Okay, so they're working on these negotiations, being like, so he's out there traveling back and forth to the West, again, West meaning Ohio, 4 times, and it seems to be going pretty good. So after the 4th time, his superiors go out there, and his superiors meet with the groups, and the groups are like, all right, here's the deal. We're willing to work with you if this is our firm boundary line, and it's like a river in Ohio that they choose as the firm boundary line. And the Americans are like, yeah, that's not what we wanted to negotiate. And both sides are very firm on this, that the Americans want the boundary to be a little bit farther, and the natives want it to be a little bit farther back.
Uh-huh.
And they don't come to an agreement, which leads to a battle. It's what's called the Battle of the Fallen Timbers, led by General Anthony Wayne, who in his own time was known as Mad Anthony.
That doesn't sound very good.
No, he was a crazy guy, and he went out there and he kicked a lot of butt. Also the guy that Fort Wayne is named after. So,
Fort Wayne, Indiana, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he goes out there, he kicks a lot of butt, and afterwards they sign what's called the Treaty of Greenville. And this gives the Americans control over a lot of Ohio, about 2/3 of Ohio. And they say, hey, in exchange for that, we'll pay you $9,500 every year forever, which they don't pay.
Of course not.
So I'm sorry to take this lightly because it's really not a light subject, but the Americans are just total bastards. So now in this period of time, it seems really clear that they're going to get moved out of New York. They're living with the Oneida. They don't love living with the Oneida, and they know sooner or later this is going to not work out either.
Mm-hmm.
So Captain Hendrick is like, okay, how do I negotiate a deal that we can get a place we can move to and feel confident that we can be okay there? He's like, I've done all this. I've fought in the war. I've gone out. I've done these negotiations. I've helped work as a translator for you guys. I've been as helpful as I can be. What
Mm-hmm.
can you do for me?
And they're like, nothing.
Yes. Yes.
Is that literally it?
No.
Okay.
But, so that famous pastor who oversaw the Stockbridge originally, his name was Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards, his family lived with them, lived with the tribe, and Captain Hendrick was friends with them. And the point I'm getting to here is that I'm not sure whether it's nephew or great nephew, but either way, a relative of that family is Aaron Burr. And Aaron Burr was a very important politician out of New York who, was in the federal government. If people have heard of Aaron Burr and are not historians, it's probably because you know that he's the guy who was in the gun battle with Alexander Hamilton, which you might recall from that wonderful milk commercial directed by Michael Bay.
I don't know this milk commercial, but the name Aaron Burr does sound familiar to me.
Okay.
So if I've heard of him, probably most people have heard of him.
Either way. So I don't know that Captain Hendrick knows Aaron Burr, but he is friends with his family.
Okay.
So he uses that connection to get Aaron Burr on his side. Aaron Burr says, hey, Captain Hendrick's awesome. He goes, he's a man of perfectly decent manners. He's been useful to the United States in war negotiation. I think he's a very intelligent man, and he would be a great person to know. And he says all this to Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson's like, all right, Aaron Burr, well, if he's got your approval, that sounds great. I will gladly talk to Captain Hendrick. Which this starts a whole bunch of letters back and forth between Jefferson and Captain Hendrick. And the whole point of this is Captain Hendrick wants to be able to settle somewhere. He says, please, can you give me a firm promise as like an American president that we can go somewhere and you're not going to mess with us? And this deal is worked out that the Stockbridge are going to move to an area called White River, Indiana. And they're going to live with other groups there, including the Miami tribe. And yes, people, the Miami tribe is in Indiana, not in Florida.
I was going to ask, did they come from Florida? Did they just kind of keep getting kicked up until they got to?
I don't know what the connection is between Miami and Indiana and Miami, Florida. I don't know that answer. But anyway, yeah, so this is kind of worked out. Jefferson's like, yeah, you and your people can live there in perpetuity. It's going to be great. And I don't know if Jefferson just kind of said this because he was being friendly or if he's a liar, but it's not true.
Well, and don't you think a lot of this probably happens that, okay, so a tribe comes to you and says, we want to settle in a place that we can just be left alone. Mm-hmm. And they probably looked at a map and said, okay, go here because it's like really far away from all the white people.
Right.
And so they're like, we'll never need that land. And then like a year and a half later, everything's grown up and now they want to take that land. So then it all starts over again.
Well, that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like the Americans have spread out to Ohio. And so now a couple years later, they're like, oh, Indiana? We'll never get to Indiana.
Yeah. And then a couple years later, they're there. And they're like, well, now you're a problem again.
Yeah. So they're exchanging letters. This deal is apparently worked out. And it gets delayed because there's a massive native uprising in... At this point in time, they call it the Northwest, which is extremely misleading for people today because the Northwest to them is like the east side of the Midwest to us. Yeah. So this happens, and there's a chief, and I might say his name wrong, but it's Tecumseh. Okay. Might not be the way you say it. And his brother, who's called the Prophet. And these guys are out there. They're trying to get different tribes together to rise up and say, Americans stink. Get them out of here. We don't accept Americans. We don't accept Jesus. Get out of here. And Captain Hendrick gets roped in because he's a military guy. He gets roped into going out there in all these military battles. And he has a really strong dislike for the Prophet. And he says... The prophet is preaching the words of Satan and is guided by the evil spirits, and he really injects his religious views into how he views this conflict. This goes on for a while, and this kind of indirectly